Shuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Chayinu Kechomi Shabbat Shalom Shabbat Shalom Shabbat Shalom Shabbat Shalom Az Yemale Shokpinu Ulshonenu Rina Az Yomru Vagoyim Higdil Adonai Lasoti Melech Shabbat Shalom 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 Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Mizot olah min hamidbar Mizot olah Mizot olah min hamidbar Mizot olah Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Libavtini achoti kala Libavtini kala Libavtini achoti kala Libavtini kala Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Dodi li va'ani lo haroeh b'shoshanim Yedid nefesh av harachaman Yedid nefesh av harachaman Mishoch avdecha El ritzonecha Mishoch avdecha Yalai lai 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 El ritzonecha Yarutz avdecha Kemo ayam Yishtachave Yalai lai Yalai lai 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 El mul hadarecha Yedid nefesh av harachaman Yedid nefesh av harachaman Mishoch avdecha El ritzonecha Mishoch avdecha Yalai lai 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 El ritzonecha Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehalel ya, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehalel ya, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hanshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah, kol hanshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hi. Shabbat Shalom. Olam chesed yibaneh, yalanai, lai, yalanai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yalanai, lai, yalanai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yalanai, lai, yalanai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yalanai, yalanai. I will build this world from love, yalanai, yalanai. And you must build this world from love, yalanai, yalanai. And if we build this world from love, yalanai, yalanai, then God will build this world from love, yalanai, yalanai. Olam chesed yibaneh, 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 yalanai, yalanai. You want to do one more? Good start. We're going to start. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's good to see all of you here in our lovely Klein Spiritual Center, Lent Chapel, Klein Spiritual Center. We are delighted to welcome all of you, those of you who are part of PTS and those of you from the wider Peninsula Jewish community. While we hear and learn from our North Peninsula scholar in residence, Rabbi Dr. David Ellenson. Well, we'll get a formal introduction to Rabbi Ellenson later. I wanted to say what a delight it is to welcome him here tonight. I had the pleasure of working on my capstone project in 2009 before my ordination at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati with Dr. Ellenson, and all about fundraising. And in 2009, it was an interesting transitional time where my capstone did not stand the test of time, you could say. And then a few months later, he offered me my smicha at Plum Street Temple in Cincinnati, Ohio. So one of the beauties of Judaism is our emphasis on continued learning. Our learning is never done. It is something that we are meant to continue to toil with throughout our entire lives. And when we do this, we not only just study the text ourselves. We are not a people of opening up a book and looking at it and saying, this is what I'm supposed to get out of it. But we do this with teachers, and we do this with study partners, Havruta. And so every single time that we sit and study with another person, every single time that we engage with a teacher, we are really doing what our tradition says that we are supposed to do, of continuing and deepening our learning. And eventually, those teachers and study partners become our friends. And when we study with them again after a long period of time, it's kind of like a homecoming. And so it is my hope that this weekend, where you can follow Dr. Ellenson all over the Peninsula, that after a while you start to feel that connection, and when you meet him again and learn from him again, that you too will have this sense of homecoming when you learn together. So in our service at PTS, we don't generally have announcements, but I did want to say a few things about the Scholar in Residence program that's happening. This Scholar in Residence program is being made possible through the generous support of individuals and organizations, including the Toby Philanthropies and the Koret Foundation, and in the Power and Partnership Fund, and grants that go along for the Bay Area JCCs. And we are a co-sponsor along with the JCC, PJCC, PTBE, Congregation Sinai, Congregation Beth Jacob, and the Ronald C. Warnick Jewish Day School. And you'll notice after the service, on the tables, you'll notice a few pieces of paper. One of them is an evaluation of tonight. If you so choose, you don't have to do it tonight. You can take it with you. There's also a flyer about an upcoming Melton series where Rabbi Lori is going to be teaching a 6-session class, and it's going to be fabulous. Please check out the flyer. And there's a really fun thing that is happening also, which you can get a frequent learner card. So it looks like this, and it's on the table. Rabbi Alban has one too. And you can get a little sticker. Who doesn't love a sticker? A sticker for all of the times that you've participated in our Scholar in Residence. And if you hand in your card, you will be invited to a special social mixer in March. You have to come 4 times. Thank you, Siva. Okay. And with that, let us open our prayer books. Let's all take a big, deep breath and welcome in Shabbat. Page 344, we're going to start with Shir Hadash. Oh, I forgot to mention, this evening we are joined by Emily Jasinski, who is our musical soloist, and Charles Calhoun, and special thanks to Mariano Sanchez. He's around and helping us.
And a couple extra rabbis.
Oh, great. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Sing unto God, all the earth, a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God, and we'll all sing along. All the earth, a new song unto God. Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash.
Turn now to page 2, followed by page 5 for our candles and Kiddush. I'd love to call up Marilyn Hollinger and Curio Spooner to light our Shabbat candles.
Vitzivanu, vitzivanu lehadlik ner. Vitzivanu, vitzivanu lehadlik ner. Shel Shabbat. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai.
Kiddush is on page 5.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat hosho be'ahava u'ratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat koshecha be'ahava u'v'ratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat lechaim u'leshalom.
To life and peace. Thank you. We'll turn now to page 20 for Lecha Dodi as we welcome in the Sabbath spirit, the Sabbath presence. We'll sing verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. And at the end, on verse 9, we'll stand if we're able and face the entrance to our chapel.
Yalalalai lecha dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai penei Shabbat, penei Shabbat nekabela. Yalalalai lecha dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai penei Shabbat, penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, hishmiyanu el hamiuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad, l'shemo tiferet v'letchila. Yai lai lai, yalalalai lecha dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai penei Shabbat, penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki mekor habracha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshava techila. Yai lai lai, yalalalai lecha dodi, yalalalai likrat kala, yalalalai penei Shabbat, penei Shabbat Kivod Adonai, alayich nigla. Gam besimcha ubtoholam toch emunei am segula boi chala
Standing and turn to page 28 for the Baruch Hu.
Am I awake? Have I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed. Yalalai lai lai, 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 yalalai lai lai.
Please be seated. Turn now to page 33 at the bottom of the page, interpretation of Ahavat Olam. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiness of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Shema followed by the V'ahavta 34 and 36.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Elohecha, b'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'odecha, v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele, asher anochi metzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha bebeitecha, uv'lechtecha v'aderech, uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha, uv'kshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uv'isharecha, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
As we get ready to sing Mi Chamocha, our song of freedom, I'll invite you first to turn to page 41. And I'll invite you to read along with the reading with me. Sing the song of men and women, joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come, the song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more, the song of a world redeemed, the song of peace. Mi Chamocha is right next to us on page 40.
נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות, עושי פלא, נורא תהילות, עושי פלא, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי, ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות, עושי פלא, נורא תהילות, עושי פלא.
We turn now to page 42, and we're going to get ready to sing Hashkivenu together. Now, this is the last Shabbat before we move forward into daylight savings time. And so, we can look out the windows and we see that it is dark on this Shabbat. And, darkness can be a bit scary. And that is why every night, not just during Shabbat, but every night, we pray Hashkivenu, this hope that in the darkness, in the scariness, whether it's physical darkness or the darkness of our lives, the things that make us stressed or concerned or feel unsafe in any way, we pray that we can find some shelter, from some safety, maybe our own sense of inner light to carry us through this darkness. And so we pray for this together. We sing for this hope together with Hashkivenu, page 42.
Let there be love.
from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms.
We sing the Shamru together at the top of page 44.
Shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam b'nei uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam v'shamru b'nei Yisrael La'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam ubayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash shavat vayinafash v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
This week, I've had a couple of opportunities to think about the topic of leadership. First of all, I got to learn from Dr. Ellenson yesterday, Rabbi Dr. Ellenson yesterday, and we talked a lot about leadership and his time as a leader, as the president of the Hebrew Union College, and the moral conundrums that often come with having responsibility and needing to make decisions that aren't so clear-cut. And I also talked about leadership in a very different context earlier in the week through a couple of B'nai Mitzvah intake meetings I had with kids. And oftentimes when I'm doing my intake meeting, I talk about Torah, and I talk about Haftarah, and I talk about who the prophets were. And I ask the kids, who is a prophet? What is a prophet? And oftentimes the definition comes up somehow that a prophet is someone who has a special relationship with God, who is a leader of the Jewish people, who has a special relationship with God. In just a moment, we're going to enter into the Amidah, which is a time in our service in which we have the opportunity to speak the words of our own heart directly to God. And it's a reminder that in this time of prayer, you don't have to be a leader necessarily for a whole group of people, but really you get to take the words of your own heart and lead them to where you may want to go. You might want to pray the words of a vote and all the prayers we're going to do together. You might want to just speak English to God and not pay attention to the Hebrew words at all. You may want to just sit and not even pray at all. A leader is someone who sometimes leads a community, who has perhaps, if you're a prophet, a special relationship to God. But in this time of the Amidah, we can each say our own words to God. We don't have to necessarily worry about the words of the community around us, but it's our chance to have that special relationship. The Amidah begins on page 46, and I'll invite you all to please rise.
Adonai, Safatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu ve'imoteinu. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Konei Hakol, ve'Zocher Chastei Avot ve'Imahot, u'mevii geula livnei v'neihem, le'ma'an shemo be'ahava. Melech ozer u'moshia u'magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezra Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, mechayei hakol atah, Rav lehoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem, Mechakel chaim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Somech nofim berofei cholim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayem emunato lishenei afar. Ichamocha ba'al gevurot, u'midom elach, melech v'mit u'mechayeh, u'matzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman atah lehachayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, mechayeh hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kedoshim b'chol yom yahalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
Friends, we can all be seated. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Let's read together on page 57. You are with us in our prayer, our love, and our doubt, and our longing to feel your presence and do your will. You are the still, clear voice within us. Therefore, O God, when doubt troubles us, when anxiety makes us tremble, when pain clouds the mind, we look inward for the answer to our prayers. There may we find you, and there find courage, insight, and endurance. And let our worship bring us closer to one another, that all Israel and all who seek you may find new strength in your service. Baruch atah Adonai, levadcha b'yirah na'avod. Page 57. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, u'lecha na'eh lehodot. We're going to take some moments for silent prayer, but as a transition poem into silent prayer, I'd like to share this poem written by Rabbi Karen Kadar. It's called Build a Vessel of Compassion. And I've been thinking a lot about compassion because we need a whole lot of compassion in our world, and we're lacking compassion as a society, not just in this country, but throughout the lands. And a couple of days ago, I was speaking in my study with the superintendent of the San Mateo Union High School District, Randall Booker, a really, really good man of compassion and grace. And he was sharing that with the people that are part of his schools, that are part of his board, he speaks of, let's give each other grace, which of course made me think of the song by Burt Bacharach and Hal David, What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love, which in 2023 may just be too high a bar to pass. But just maybe, we can tap into our own tradition. Judaism speaks of the virtue of chen, of having grace. We have Hannah, a biblical character in the prophets that's a model of grace. Maybe we can share grace and act with grace towards each other and to those we don't even know who may not be like us. This is Rabbi Kadar's poem. We are all broken, working out the dents. We are tender beings. The fragments have sharp edges and carry sparks of light. This is the truth of our humanity, to take what is shattered piece by piece and build a vessel of beauty, of compassion. We'll pray silently. Berach prayer is on page 253. And it's our custom when we are offering our prayer of healing to give people the opportunity to say the name of the person, Grace. To say the name of the person that they are praying for. Their healing of body, their healing of spirit. So we'll start on this side of the chapel. If you'd like to say the name of the person you're praying for tonight and your connection to that person, please feel free.
My dear friend, Andre Rivers.
My friend, Michelle Horn-Davis.
Camille Batiste, a dear friend.
Jody Seltzer, Mark Grossman.
Marcel and Rebecca Fraser.
Theo Kramer, our great-nephew.
My friend Jerry Jenkins' daughter, Cassie Jenkins.
Janet Zucker and John Weatherby.
David Rasner, a high school friend.
Chaim Tzvi Arya Netanel Ben Chana.
My severely disabled adopted son, Raymond Luke.
Barbara Levinson, my daughter.
My stepmother, Nancy Polanski.
Sally Hine, Rachel Bruckner, and Sarah Russell.
Sadiq Ben Khanadaba.
My friends Ann Copeland and Murray Jewett.
Fatih Atis.
Joel Prohofsky, my daughter's brother-in-law.
My friends Sky Pellicro, Bob Jaffe, Abigail Grafton, Carol Priven, Carol Ruth Silver. Gosh, there's so many. All those in need of healing of my friends, my cousin Bob Leaf, and the author, teacher, Rachel Naomi Remen.
My husband, Ryan Jasinski.
To those names we add Shoshana Bat Chaim Veshena, Paul Raffer, Peter Deutsch, Marion Klieger, Peter Powell, Kemi Klein, Carol and Don Scolini, Eve Bauer, Naomi Spitzer, Alex Newton, Willie Herring, Dorothy Creeks, Esther Dover, Ed Martin, Cole Martin, Craig Martin, Leslie Martin, Gina Sadiq, Jennifer Lack, Dan Gerson, Burton Boxerman, Atticus Pearson, Jerry Harris, David Kobe, Rodney Lau, Tracy Vaca, Jacqueline Fields, Sam Chan, Claudia LaChance, and Frida Klieger. And we say, Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaChulim.
May the source
It is my real pleasure to have Rabbi Dr. David Ellenson with us this Sabbath evening and to have the pleasure of introducing him. When I think about what I retain from rabbinical school, the most, it's particular examples and virtues of my instructors. Information was and is important, but what really touches my soul and my heart 30 plus years after I started rabbinical school is the examples and the models of my most favorite instructors. And there are a lot of people here that I have said to, either in the course of studies in the Klein Spiritual Center or in my study, you do not need to be consistent in your personal theology. Folks, it was Dr. Ellenson who told me that in the context of the favorite paper I wrote in 5 years of rabbinical school, which was, write your thoughts on God. Write your personal theology. And I'm sure that's why just 2 years after having that class in my first confirmation class, at the fall of 1994, all the studies we did about God led in the spring to their writing their personal theologies. Well, this will be the 29th year, David, that I've done that with my confirmation class, and the fruits, the best of the best, comes out in the confirmation service itself. And in our modern philosophy class, Dr. Ellenson would introduce us in a really inviting way to a whole array of thinkers about God. And any one of these thinkers might be the right thinker for a particular moment in your life about a particular subject. And for me, that was incredibly liberating and opened me up to so many more thoughts about God and ways of thinking about God and ways of trying to walk in the shadow of God than I would have otherwise. Thank you. So we're very lucky on our North Peninsula to have the kind of relationships between synagogues and our Jewish Community Center and our Jewish Day School that was created and named after our member, Ron Warnick. And every year, we have been lucky to have, thanks to the generosity of funds within the Peninsula Jewish Community Center and contributions from the synagogues and the day school, to bring a scholar every single year. And that gives us the opportunity to learn together across denominational lines and houses of worship lines and really come together in a whole lot of different settings to learn from a person who can add to the intellectual, philosophical, and spiritual vigor of our community and expose us to new and broad ways of thinking. And we're better for it. So I want to thank Rabbi Lori Matzkin, the spiritual leader of the Peninsula Jewish Community Center. And I want to welcome some people who are here, particularly because David Ellenson is here. Well, one of them would be David Ellenson. David, welcome and thank you for being here. I also want to invite his son, Rabbi Micah Ellenson. And I also want to welcome Rabbi Moshe Hain, and I also want to welcome Mark Hirschman, who is the son of Rabbi Maury Hirschman of blessed memory. And I want to draw your attention to that because it is a blessing for us to be able to be together, and your being here brings us together. So, with that, I'll just briefly say that Rabbi Ellenson is a revered professor and thinker from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and was the president of the Hebrew Union College. And in particular, he brought a level of morality and humanity and depth of thought that made all of us at the college grateful and proud. And as you can see by his being here, and by the books and the articles that he has written, he's a major thinker and contributor to how we live in a thoughtful world today and how we might live more thoughtfully. So Rabbi Dr. Ellenson is going to speak, and then we're going to have some chances for questions and answers. And this would be, if you got a question on a deep level, this would be the person to direct that question to. So, Dr. Ellenson, the space is yours. You are so welcome.
Okay, that better? Okay, good. I just got hearing aids last week, and because I have to now put this behind my ear, I took the hearing aids out in order to be able to accommodate this machine. I have, I won't say I have technological phobia, but it's pretty close to it. At least one advantage is I'll be able to speak, but because I don't have my hearing aids in, I may not be able to hear myself, but that won't be so bad. In fact, when I just took it out now, my grandfather was deaf. He had punctured an eardrum when he lived in the former Soviet Union, and he had punctured the eardrum purposefully because he wanted to avoid service in the military under the Tsar. And I remember saying to my grandfather, well, how in the world could you do this? And he said, well, there are a lot of horrible things in the world, but being a Jew in the Tsar's army might be really the worst. But my major memories is that he would come in from work. He owned a used auto parts place, a junkyard, and after he would come in at the end of the day and wash himself and come down. And my grandmother always had a few suggestions to make to him about how he could improve his life. I know that none of the rest of you have had any experiences like this in your married life. And at a certain point, one thing I used to enjoy, my grandfather would look at me, he would wink, and as my grandfather was, or as my grandmother was anxious to promote his amelioration in whatever direction she thought, he would turn it off in front of her, and that, of course, would lead to other emotional reactions at that time. It's just amazing all the things you think about. I'm elated that rabbis and so many former teachers and students of mine are here tonight, but I will mention I'm very, very happy to see Jeff Rosen. Jeff was my student at UCLA, really a star student, and the influence I had on him is that rather than go to rabbinical school, which I had hoped he would do, he became an attorney. So the world is probably much better off to have an attorney of your caliber and ethical and moral standing at this time. And you would have just been another of all the wonderful rabbis we had. So I want to say I am really happy to be here tonight, and I want to thank really all of you for greeting me here. And Lori, I just can't even express enough how appreciative I am. And it is really a pleasure to have my son here. On this occasion, he has to listen to me, which is always an aspiration that a parent has in relationship to a child. When Lori and I had spoken about different topics during this week, one of the ways in which we wanted to word the time that I'd be with you is to call elements of my teaching shades of gray. By shades of gray, we live in an age when people are more and more inclined to think in binary terms of black and white, absolute right, absolute wrong. All of us are aware that, of course, in the age in which we live, we are all able to live in siloed kind of ways. I mean, I myself, MSNBC, CNN, every once in a while I watch Fox News just to see what's going on there. But the reality is you don't have to hear anything almost that you don't want to hear, or at least, even as you have events that occur that you're not particularly elated over, you do have the ability to just hear people who, by and large, not only shape your opinions, but share your opinions in terms of how things can and should be understood. And this weekend, or this week with you, there are a couple of places where I want to talk about matters that aren't really necessarily so black and white, where, in fact, Jewish tradition itself and some of the exemplars of our tradition teach in such a way that there really are areas of gray. And I mention this because the topic that I'm bringing here tonight, I want to say, is really quite a personal topic to me, and I'll try to put it in the context that led me to talk about, and do all of you have these sheets of paper, about character in the teaching of Torah, or the other way to put it, you can wait a moment before we begin to look at it, is the question is, can you learn Torah from, if I use the Hebrew term, a manuval? A manuval is nicely translated as a scoundrel. I'll let you, a moral scoundrel. There are other ways in which you might think of the term, but I actually began to look at this because of events that occurred in my own life. So I want to indicate that as I present these texts to you, I will tell you how I acted on these texts and also indicate that I've second-guessed myself about the text about 300 times. That may just be something characterological about me. In the end, I find one of the most difficult things in leadership or in ethical decision-making is at a certain point, you actually have to make a decision. The rabbi mentioned very, very kindly, when I would teach courses in topics like Jewish thought, I'd present a whole range of thinkers and then leave it to the students to decide who would speak to them or not. In other words, on one occasion it might be Abraham Joshua Heschel, on another Judith Plaskow, on another Rachel Adler, still yet again Brad Artson or Elliot Dorff. I mean, a whole variety of thinkers who would think in a different variety of ways. One of the most difficult things I had when I moved from the academy and when I became president of Hebrew Union College, I had only been teaching at UCLA, USC, Hebrew Union. I had no experience as an administrator. I had never raised a penny in terms of fundraising. I really entered a new world. And the other thing that I learned was the chair of the board, after my first board meeting, said something along the lines of, David, you're very erudite. You present all kinds of subtleties in regard to every issue that comes before the board. He said, that actually works extremely well in a classroom or a seminar. But one of the things that you're going to have to learn is that ultimately, on the board, we actually have to make a decision. And usually it's somewhat imperfect, and we have probably considered all kinds of factors, but in the end, we have to make a decision about what it is we're going to do. And he said, that is different than a seminar where you just say, Maimonides said this and Judah Halevi said that, and I leave it to you to make of it what you want. What I'm trying to bring before you here, and I want to try to place this in a real-life context, is that in 2018, I became president of the Hebrew Union College again. Initially, I had retired at the end of 2013, and my beloved successor, I hope I won't cry when I mention his name, Rabbi Aaron Pankin, passed away, and I was called upon to replace him for an 11-month period before Andrew Rayfeld was selected as president. During that time, a person who was very, very close to me, who I had known for almost 50 years, we had gone to graduate school together, and we were very, very close friends, charges of a Me Too nature were brought against this friend. And I was in the position of being president of the college. It was extremely, extremely painful, but I brought it before the HR department of the college, and ultimately this person retired voluntarily from the college as the investigation went on. Later that year, my colleague Michael Marmer, who had been the provost of Hebrew Union College and is the professor of Jewish theology on our Jerusalem campus, I'm sure all of you who are rabbis know him, he and I wrote a book for Brandeis University Press. And it's a reader in American Jewish Thought, called American Jewish Thought since 1934. Can anybody guess why we picked 1934? Who wrote a book in 1934? Does anybody know? Alan, you moved to the top of the class. I don't know. You rabbis should do better. Just listen to Alan right now. Mordecai Kaplan wrote Judaism as a Civilization in 1934. So we began the book. The title of the book came as a result of Rabbi Kaplan's work. And in the work, what we attempted to do was to present a variety of opinions on every issue. The purpose of the book is that you would use it in a classroom, and whether the topic is God, Jewish peoplehood, feminism, sexuality and gender, whatever the topic would be, we have essays from people who actually could not tolerate one another if they were in the same room. Michael and I thought the book perhaps should be entitled, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And we tried to imagine what it would be to bring some of these people around the table. For example, a number of you may know Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who's head of Teruah, a very leftist, progressive social justice organization in both Israel and America. We have her writings on social justice, and next to her we have Meir Kahana. So we're trying to imagine what it would be like for Jill and Meir Kahana to be in a room together. Or some of you may know Judith Butler from the University of California here at Berkeley. She is not only an outstanding theorist in regard to feminism and gender and other issues, but she is rabidly anti-Zionist. I mean, she has written a number of books that are anti-Israel. So we'd have her, and then we would have Ruth Weiss from Harvard, who is, I'll just say, right-wing. I don't know how the two of them could actually be in a room together. For Dr. Weiss, the only problem with the Jewish state and the Jewish people is we don't exercise power more forcefully. We need to do it more forcefully, not less forcefully. So we also had an issue that dealt with the matter of Jewish peoplehood. We live in a community where there's a very high rate of Jewish exogamy, Jewish outmarriage, Jews marrying people born non-Jewish. Is this bad or good for the community? So in this section, we had an essay written by an individual from Dartmouth College named Shaul Magid, who thinks it's great we live in a post-ethnic world, and in fact, the reality of intermarriage is really a blessing for the Jewish people. It enriches our people. It brings all kinds of persons into the community who otherwise would not be. And then this other individual who left the college, we included him as well because there had been a debate between this individual and Shaul Magid on the question of, is post-ethnicity good for the Jewish community or bad? And this individual felt it was bad for the community. I had a number of very, very close friends. Interestingly, no one called me about Meir Kahane being in the book, which I would have anticipated. But a lot of people called me about this individual being put in the book, contending that the sexual transgressions this individual committed were such that, in a sense, by even putting him in a work, I was elevating or rehabilitating this individual. I have to confess, maybe apologetically, well, it isn't actually apologetically, it's just factual at this moment. We didn't think about rehabilitating anybody. We certainly would not want to rehabilitate Meir Kahane. In fact, the only person who really complained was Michael Marmer's wife, who did say to us, how in the world could you put Meir Kahane in a book on Jewish thought? But we felt, well, he represents a position, and I think many of us are even aware of how powerful that position is in light of the contemporaneous Israeli political scene. And we felt that in the book, his voice deserved to be there in that way. I'm also mindful, I'm a graduate, among other places. I went to a lot of schools. Every time I finished a school, my father, when I would enter another one, would say, I think he couldn't believe it when I finally graduated Hebrew Union and completed my doctorate at Columbia. He just said, what school are you going to next? But I finally had an end to it. But I attended and received a master's from the University of Virginia. And of course, Thomas Jefferson has now become a controversial figure. And the University of Virginia, for those of us who attended it, is actually called by people at the university Mr. Jefferson's University. And in fact, on the diplomas, you have Jefferson's picture. The president of UVA several years ago wrote a letter to all the UVA family, and in it she began with a quotation from Thomas Jefferson. And then there were all kinds of responses saying you can't quote Jefferson. Don't you know that he was, which he was, a slave owner, and he fathered children with a slave of his. And all of this is true with Sally Hemings. Question is then, can you ever read a writing of Thomas Jefferson? Does he become reduced to that? And in New York City, where I currently live, Jefferson's bust was removed from the city council because of, I shouldn't put it in quotation marks, the reality of slavery that marked his life. And just yesterday, some of you who are alumni of Hebrew Union, I read a letter from the president where Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the founder, really, of the reform movement in America, unlike his rival, David Einhorn. David Einhorn was a rabbi in Baltimore and was probably one of the strongest abolitionist voices in the United States. He would speak every week in the 1850s and 60s in Maryland, which was a border state, but nevertheless countenanced slavery. And every week he would give a sermon against slavery in his pulpit. The board of the congregation came to Rabbi Einhorn and said, you have to stop, Rabbi. You are endangering us with the non-Jewish population here in Baltimore. Or to put it in other terms, they said to him, you're really killing us. You have to stop this. And so as a result, in 1861, after his board came to him and said, you cannot speak anymore on abolition, he got up the very next Friday night and gave the strongest pro-abolitionist speech of his entire career. He said, you all must not have understood me, and I must not have explained it properly. One thing I will tell you, my mother used to always say to me that if you stand up for your principles, people will always respect you. Well, I just want to say, if you look at the case of Rabbi Einhorn, they may respect you, but it does not mean they will give you a job. He had to literally flee for his life the very next night, and he ended up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the rest of his career. His great rival was Isaac Mayer Wise, who, as I said before, founded the Hebrew Union College, but Rabbi Wise, who lived in Cincinnati, actually took the stance on any number of occasions in favor of slavery, saying the Bible countenanced slavery, and he was far, far from an abolitionist. And now, I just read yesterday from the president of Hebrew Union College that the question is, how are you going to deal with the legacy where the founder of the college was an individual, and it runs contrary to all of our stereotypical visions of the Reform movement, whose stance on a matter of great moral concern runs counter to how, indeed, most of us feel. And this will have to be worked out. So these questions are real. And when I was challenged about the inclusion of this figure in the book, I wanted to look and say, or at least attempt to answer it, from a Jewish perspective. So this whole long introduction to these 2 pages that we're going to look at is in response to the question, can you learn from someone who is a menuval, someone who is morally flawed? What does Jewish tradition teach about that? So with that said, and I want to again thank Rabbi Matzkin, I had initially 5 pages, which I had cut down from 20, in relationship to sources on this question. And in the end, these are kind of like David Ellenson's greatest hits. These are my greatest hits, the sources we're going to look at in response to this question. And I will tell you right at the outset, can you learn Torah from someone who is morally compromised? What does Jewish tradition say? I can state emphatically, even as we get ready to read this, it depends. Jewish tradition, not surprisingly, we're going to see, has a variety of teachings on this. So with this said, let's go through these pages, and what I'd like, hopefully, to do, and I ask the permission of the rabbis here, is at the end, I hope we'll have some time with the kahal, the congregation here tonight, to hear from you and to see what you think about these sources. I don't want to indicate that they're dispositive or definitive, but having said that, I think they offer us at least suggestions that can answer us in relationship to this, this period. So Maimonides is very clear in the Mishnah Torah, the great code of Jewish law that Maimonides wrote, completed in the year 1190. The Mishnah Torah means literally the second Torah. Maimonides meant it as a constitution for the Jewish people. He writes the following: one should not study from a teacher who does not follow a proper path. Even if that person is very wise, I ask your pardon for the fact, and I said this morning with a group I was teaching, so I'll just say it again. Judaism is a patriarchal tradition. And again, I know that's shocking for everybody here. No one would anticipate that. So the language is in the masculine here, but I could just say you shouldn't learn from anyone, even if they are very wise, and their instruction is required by the entire nation. Until that person returns to a good path, they can repent, as implied by the prophet Malachi. For the priest's lips, Siftei HaKohen, they shall keep knowledge and they shall seek Torah from that person's mouth, because that person is Malach Adonai Tzvaot. That person who speaks with wisdom and integrity, and it possesses both, that person is literally a malach. Malach, the word means angel, but here it means messenger. That person is a messenger from the God of hosts. Our sages said if a teacher resembles Malach Adonai Tzevaot, a messenger of the Lord of hosts, then you should seek Torah from them, and if that person does not, do not seek Torah from them. By the way, and when you were mentioning this before, Rabbi, messengers of the God of hosts have a gigantic advantage over most rabbis. Namely, a prophet only had the obligation to speak truth. The prophet heard directly from God. Rabbis, I know this is hard to believe, and I look at some of my colleagues here, we don't have necessarily as direct a line to God. Necessarily, I emphasize that. One of my teachers at Hebrew Union College when I was a student, Leonard Kravitz, used to say, why do they call Moses, who is the greatest of the prophets, nevertheless in Jewish tradition, he's referred to as Moshe Rabbeinu, not Moshe Nevi'enu. He's called Moses our rabbi and not Moses our prophet. And Dr. Kravitz used to say to us, it's because a prophet has a great advantage. A prophet knows truth, and that's their only concern. A prophet receives truth from God and simply proclaims it. But a rabbi tries to seek wisdom. And as he put it, quoting scripture, Vaydaber Moshe el bnei Yisrael vayisa'u, which he translated as Vaydaber Moshe el bnei Yisrael. When Moses would speak to the Jewish people, Yisa'u, they were moved. The task of a rabbi, unlike a prophet, isn't only to tell the truth, it's to actually try to determine how is it you move people in one direction or another, which is not always an easy kind of thing to do. Here, Maimonides makes the law, the statute, as it were, is very, very clear. You cannot learn from someone if they are not of impeccable character. Now we're going to get to a Talmudic story. In Moed Katan, a passage in the Talmud. There was once a certain rabbinic colleague, a chaver, whose reputation was objectionable. It seems that this person, we'll see later, was guilty of improper sexual behavior. Said Rab Judah, how is one to act? So this Rabbi Judah says, we cannot put the ban upon him, as we have need of this person as an able teacher. So this person is really uniquely qualified, uniquely competent to teach. We need this teacher's wisdom. So I say we can't put a ban on this person. But then, on the one hand, we can't put a ban on him. On the other, not to put the ban on him, we cannot afford. As if we allow this person to teach, it becomes a chilul Hashem. It is a profanation of God's name to learn from this individual because his sexual misconduct makes him unqualified to teach. Said he to Rabbi ben Barchana, have you heard an explanation about how to resolve this dilemma? And then he replied, thus said Rabbi Yochanan, what does the text mean? From the priest's lip you should keep knowledge, and you should only seek law at his mouth. For the teacher should be the messenger of the God of hosts, just what we saw above in Maimonides. It means that if the master, the teacher, is like unto a messenger of the God of hosts, then we should seek law from this person. But if not, we should not seek law at his mouth. Thereupon Rabbi Judah pronounced a cherem, a ban upon him. He said, this man cannot teach. Regardless of his wisdom, we cannot learn from him. The first paragraph seems completely in keeping with the way in which Maimonides codified the law. In the end, Rabbi Judah became indisposed, meaning he became very ill. The rabbis came to inquire about him, and that man, meaning the individual who had sinned but who was very, very brilliant, came along with his colleagues, the other rabbis. When Rabbi Judah beheld him, he laughed. Said the man to him, it's not enough that you put a ban upon me, but you even laugh at me. In other words, why are you mocking me? Why are you laughing now? You've already said I can't teach anymore and I can't be part of the yeshiva and I can't teach the students regardless of how much wisdom I have to impart to them. Why are you laughing at me while you're on your deathbed? But Rabbi Judah responded, I'm not laughing at you. As I am departing to the world to come, I'm glad to think that even towards a personage such as you, someone who is so brilliant, even then I upheld the principles of our tradition and I would not allow you to teach. The laughter, so to speak, then, is Rabbi Judah saying, I think I really did the right thing and I'm going to earn a place in the world to come because even as I recognize we needed you in certain ways, I nevertheless stood firmly on my principles and would not allow you to teach. And then Rabbi Judah died. The man then came to the yeshiva and said, absolve me. Rabbi Judah's dead. In other words, I want to now make an appeal. Let me reinstate me as a teacher in the yeshiva. Said the rabbis to him, we don't have anyone here of the standing of Rabbi Judah who could absolve you. But go to Rabbi Judah Hanasi, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, and let him absolve you. And then the man went and presented himself to Judah Hanasi, Judah the prince. And then Rabbi Judah the prince did, and I want to make the point about what Rabbi Dan said earlier when he said, if you have any questions, tonight you should come to me. I want to say, if you have any questions, I'm going to look at all the rabbis here, go to them. It always makes it somewhat easier. Rabbi Judah went to Rabbi Ami. He went to one of his lieutenants. And he said, go forth and look into the case. This is a district attorney. I love law and order. This is calling, what's the guy's name? Sam Waterston. You take care of this issue. It's a little too much for me. Let me give it to the ADA, as it were, the Associate District Attorney. Go forth and look into his case. If it's necessary to absolve him, absolve him. Rabbi Ami looked into the case, and he had a mind to absolve him. Said, maybe we should. But then Shmuel ben Nachmani got on his feet and said, even a separation imposed on one of the domestics in Rabbi's house was not lightly treated by the rabbis for 3 years. How much more so one imposed by our colleague, Rav Judah? In other words, whatever position you take, if I can use this word, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. The inclination was to absolve him. But on the other hand, people are then complaining, how can you absolve him? Put him in the book and show intellectual integrity, or don't put him in the book because that reflects a lack of moral fortitude, I guess one could say, in one kind of way. Said Rabbi Zira, from the fact that this venerable scholar should just now have turned up at the college after not having come for many years, you must take it that it is not desirable to absolve that man. And therefore, in the end, Rabbi Judah didn't absolve him. And the man went away crying that he couldn't be forgiven. A wasp then came and stung the man who had been placed under the ban in the privy member, and he died. I hope all of you understand the euphemism. He was stung by a bee in his private part, and he died as a result of it. Talmud has a lot of interesting stories, is all I would point out here. They brought him into the grotto of the pious, a graveyard for righteous teachers, but they wouldn't admit him there. The man couldn't be buried along with Hasidim because of his sins. But they did bring him into the grotto of the judges, the Shoftim, and they received him because he had been a judge. So let me just stop a minute and we'll get to another story. Any comments so far or reactions to this? How do you understand this story? Yes.
Seems to me that a rabbi, the definition of a rabbi, I'm almost offended by it.
Which part are you offended by?
Maybe that's the wrong word, but I think a rabbi is somebody who asks good questions and not somebody who has answers.
Okay, and how does that relate to this story then of can you learn from him? So if he asks good questions, I'm just asking now, are you saying that if he asks good questions, then he should be allowed to continue to teach?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Other people? Yeah, in the back?
I'm not sure I got the name right, but I think it's Rosh Lakash. He was abandoned.
Yes, Reish Lakish, yeah.
Yeah, and then he became a well-known rabbi. He's quoted in the Talmud.
Yes.
How does that fit in with what Maimonides says about, if he's
Well, in that case, in Reish Lakish's case, he repented. And so Maimonides does leave room for repentance. Okay. Yes. Maybe just a little louder. I don't have my hearing aids.
Sholom. This was his talk, and I learned this like 60 years ago, and I love this man. I studied Martin Buber with him. When I was in Israel, I visited him. That was the last time. I heard a few years ago that he was sexually inappropriate. I was sick. So what am I supposed to do with that? This man, he touched me so much, his teachings, and I have the utmost respect for him. And we might be referring to the same person, I don't know. But so I'm sitting here thinking, well, how do I feel about all this?
Right.
And so that was one thing that came up. And then I have another rabbi story which I'll save for later. But this one, I have lots of things that I can do. But this one, I just really don't know in this moment what to do about what I think.
Right. Anybody over here? Yeah, in the back, we'll go 1, 2. It's not clear. All you have is the story in the Talmud. So let's assume for a moment, if he did repent, by the way, it's a relatively easy case, so to speak. In other words, from the viewpoint of the tradition, even Maimonides, as with Reish Lakish, if the person repented, there's supposed to be room for repentance. Let's assume, though, he didn't repent. In other words, let's make it a hard case, not an easy one. And that may be akin to what was just said a moment ago. Yes. Right.
And there was a mind to
yes.
Absolve him, but it was the population of the rabbis, especially who turned back around and said, I guess we can't do that. The justice falls into us as people to determine that we're going to maintain the memory of someone who's died rather than to look at our situation and essentially change our minds based on what we see now.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is when the individual dies, they won't put him in the graveyard of the most respected persons, the graveyard of the pious, but they do bury him in the graveyard of the judges. I mean, he gets some recognition in that kind of way when he passes away. But yes, it is due to the respect to the rabbi who's deceased. Also note the rabbi who has sufficient authority. In effect, it's akin to the Supreme Court saying we're just not going to hear this case. Namely, let me ask my lieutenant. My lieutenant first says, yes, we should forgive him. But then another rabbi, as you point out, says, well, how can we forgive him? Rabbi Judah wouldn't, and leaves it at that. Yes, in the back. Right. Right. Yes. Well, it may be a philosophical. Look, one of the things about Jewish tradition, it contains, as my teacher Eugene Borowitz used to put it, not a variety of sources. Dr. Borowitz used to use the term a contrariety of sources. Namely, you just have opinions that contradict one another. My favorite parts of the Talmud are one where it talks about a particular mitzvah. It says, if you perform this mitzvah, putting on tzitzis, it's like fulfilling all the mitzvot of the Torah. And that's true until you turn to the next page where it says, if you observe Shabbos, that's like fulfilling the entire Torah. And that's true until you turn to the next page. Namely, the Talmud is not a code. It's much more like the congressional record, so to speak. It just contains all kinds of opinions. And one reason why some people like Talmud better than codes, the Talmud is like me before I became president. There's no need to come to a conclusion. I mean, that doesn't mean they never come to a conclusion, but often the rabbis in the Talmud are very happy to not come to a conclusion. They just leave both things sitting on the pages. So when you ask, is there a virtue ethics, the answer is yes. But it doesn't mean that's the only way in which it can be approached. Okay, we'll get a couple, 1, 2, and then Jeff, you'll be 3.
I've been forever a Jew, and my father was a Jew. His family were Jews from Poland, and so forth. I always remember a rabbi being a shofet,
A judge.
And from there on, it could and widen. Okay, so when I was in Shanghai as a Jew that left Europe,
Right.
during the war, I was in Talmud Torah, and subsequently, I learned Gemara. Well, when Gemara is the issue, it's basically finding out the real
Reasons.
and you said that something different. So I was wondering.
What I wanted to say is often in a Talmudic argument, they leave both minority and majority opinions on the same page. And part of the reason for that is that later generations may come back to the minority opinion. Namely, the Talmud it does sometimes make a decision on a page, but it often doesn't. It doesn't all the time. Okay.
There's a principle that there are places in heaven that you can only rise to Baal Teshuva.
Right.
Tzadikim.
Right.
So if this transgressor had not repented, had not done Teshuva, I think Talmud would say that. The fact that it doesn't mention that, I think, is a significant part of this teaching.
Well, the part that I did leave out is the final sentence, which I was a little embarrassed by. Yeah, I mean, the final sentence actually says, why is it that he merited being buried? It doesn't, in the graveyard of the judges, it's not because he necessarily repented, but when he wanted to respond to his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, which is a euphemism to engage in sexual activity, he would go to another town where no one knew him. Where no one knew him, he would engage in sexual intercourse with a harlot and not in that way bring public shame to the rabbinate or the Jewish people. So I just left that sentence out. Jeff and then Rabbi Matzkin Laurie. Yes. Right. Yeah, I want to just say in this case, this individual who left the employ of HUC, I mean, this actually is part of what led me to have the inclusion of this passage in the book. It was the best article written on this particular topic, leaving aside who wrote it. I mean, there wasn't any other article as good as this article for putting forth that position. But the other way in which I felt was, and I don't know what this says about me, this man lost his job. He will never have employment again in the Jewish community, I can assure you of that. And what's a just or legitimate punishment? And frankly, I mean, this is my judgment. I thought, well, this guy's probably, I don't know, by the way, his victims may not feel this way, but victims, while they're allowed, in my understanding, to testify at trials when it comes to sentencing, it's still the judge who issues the sentence, not the victims, even as they take it into account. And I guess I felt, in terms of what the person had suffered, I want to make this clear. I included it because it was worthy of being included, the content of it, in my judgment. But I also included it, but it's a secondary, but not an unimportant factor. I thought the person had been punished sufficiently. In other words, being unable to earn your livelihood anymore. Someone comes to be disbarred or a person can't work. You know, someone engages in chicanery on Wall Street and then they're disqualified to work any longer in finance. You know, how long, I mean, what's sufficient punishment? I mean, do you just put them to death? I mean, that's an extreme, but that comes to be a question. In other words, I don't want to take it ad absurdum. In other words, there are certain qualities that need to be addressed, and I'm telling you about my thinking, but I'm probably also bringing it up here tonight because it's still not completely clear in my mind. When I was president and exercising leadership, it was infinitely easier to do it when I was convinced that I was 100% right. And that happened on occasion with issues of women, with issues of gay rights, GLBTQ plus issues. I wrote many, many articles on these kinds of issues and received a lot of criticism. And I have to confess, I wouldn't teach about that tonight in that way, because I think I really did the right thing. I had no area of gray. This is an area of gray here for me, and I'm trying to go through what I think my reasoning has been, and it's probably a defensive kind of posture in certain ways, but I don't want to go so far as to say you could learn from anybody. And I don't know what to do with after you find out that someone who you've revered turns out to be, I'm using the term euphemistically, a scoundrel. Rabbi, did you want to add? Yes.
And yet it's sort of embedded in this Agavitas story where I want to say that the loss is this karma. Like they're arguing about him and Harem, and the world is going to work it out, and he's going to die anyway before the decision. And so how do we wrestle with our own process versus sort of trusting the universe, as it were?
Yeah, and by the way, note he's not only stung, note where he's stung and died. I mean, yeah, that's your karma. So let's go to one last case, and then if people, I don't know exactly what time it is, but I really appreciate all your comments, and I want to really make the point I am purposely not attempting to resolve this tonight. I'm presenting it because I think it actually is a dilemma. But I wanted to give you a story of the heresy of a man named Elisha ben Abuya. Elisha ben Abuya is Hakofer Hechima for Sam B'Masoret HaYehudit. He is the most famous heretic in Jewish tradition. His sins are not of a sexual or of a moral nature. They're actually of a theological nature in terms of the rabbis. The term that he is used by in rabbinic literature, he is described as acher, the other. They won't even use his name because he is considered the heretic par excellence. And some of you may have read the book by Milton Steinberg, Rabbi Milton Steinberg, As a Driven Leaf, which is an historical novel based on the few Talmudic statements we have. So it's taught in a extra-canonical Tanaitic statement, a Breita. Never mind it. You know, it's like when I used to teach at places like UCLA Intro to Judaism, I used to always like it, or an intro class where you're teaching about tefillin. And tefillin, the translation for it in English is phylacteries. But I have to tell you, if you don't know what tefillin are, I don't think phylacteries would help you very much. It's kind of a useless translation in a lot of ways. So trying to define a breita if we're not in a rabbinical setting, never mind. It's a rabbinic statement that Rabbi Jacob says, there isn't a single mitzvah written in the Torah whose reward is stated alongside it, which isn't dependent on resurrection of the dead. In other words, the purpose is, the rabbis observe, since you were speaking philosophically, tzaddik v'ralo v'rasha v'tovlo. Namely, they're righteous people. Bad things happen to righteous people, and good things happen to scoundrels. In other words, I don't know if you're aware of it, everybody doesn't actually get justice in this world. If what you want is to get what you deserve, well, sometimes you might not want to get what you deserve. You might want a little rachamim, but this is a problem in all monotheistic religions that have the notion that God is just and all-powerful. Because the reality is justice just doesn't always obtain in the world. So you have to always have a notion like resurrection of the dead or notion of a world to come. Because in a world to come, it will all be resolved, but it's not going to be resolved in this world. So with regard to honoring one's father and mother, this is what is written in Deuteronomy, that your days may be long and that it may go well with you. If you honor your father and mother, Micah, I want you to listen to this. If you honor your father and your mother, what's the reward that you get? You get long life. The Torah is explicit about that. Nachon, yeah, bidiyuk. You get arichat yamim, you get length of days. The Torah says it explicitly. Furthermore, with regard to the dispatch of the mother bird from the nest, it is written that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. If you're about to pick eggs from the nest of a mother bird, it's considered cruel to do it in the presence of the mother bird. You have to shoo her away so that you don't take the egg from the nest while the mother bird is there. And what's the reward for it? That it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. So there are two mitzvot. If you observe Kain Sipur, the nest of this bird, and you don't take the eggs from it, you observe that mitzvah while the mother bird is there, you get arichat yamim, you get length of days, and if you honor your father and mother, you gain length of days. The Torah is explicit in two places. Despite this, it occurred that there was a boy whose father said to him, climb to the top of the building and fetch me chicks. And he climbed to the top of the building and dispatched the mother bird and took the young. Thereby he fulfilled, does everyone understand this? He fulfilled both commandments. He listened to his father and he dispatched the mother bird. But what happened to him? Upon his return, he fell and died. Where is the goodness of the days of this one, and where's the length of days of this one? Namely, Elisha ben Abuya's heresy was based on these passages in the Torah and an empirical observation on his part. Namely, what is it he saw? The Torah said, you're going to live a long time if you obey your parents and you observe this mitzvah, al-kain sipur, on the nest of a mother bird. This boy observed it. Elisha ben Abuya was there. He saw the boy fall and the boy died. And according to the tradition, Elisha ben Abuya says, late din v'late dayan. There is no judgment, or late din, there is no law, and there is no judgment. Namely, for him, the death of this boy demonstrated empirically that the promises of the Bible were false. They were false. But I wanted to show you that there are at least two cases. There's a saying of his recorded in the Mishnah, again in Pirkei Avot, where he's quoted as saying, learning Torah as a child is like writing on a fresh paper, but learning Torah in old age is like writing on a palimpsest. Palimpsest is a medieval document, or a document where there's been writing on it, and then you kind of try to erase it and you write over it. You can do it, but you kind of see what's been erased. So there are two statements, and then also an avot de Rabbi Natan, to whom may a man who has good deeds and has studied much Torah be compared? To one who in building lays stones first for a foundation and then lays bricks over them, so that however much water may collect at the side of the building, it will not wash away. In contrast, a person who has no good deeds, even though he studied Torah, to what may he be compared? To a person who in building lays bricks first, then heaps stones over them, so that even if a little water collects, it at once undermines the structure. The point is, he's an apostate, but they include his writings in canonical literature, in Jewish literature. Can you learn Torah from an apostate? Well, it seems the rabbis are saying you can, regardless of whether they make it an explicit statement. And now they make the following point. After his apostasy, Acher, they don't call him by his name, was riding on a horse on Shabbat, and Rabbi Meir was walking behind him to learn Torah at his mouth. Rabbi Meir, one of the greatest rabbis, was a student of Elisha ben Abuya. Elisha ben Abuya, by this point, isn't observing Jewish law. He's getting on his horse in violation of Sabbath law, and he's riding beyond the boundary of what's permitted. But what's interesting is Rabbi Meir continues to learn with him, even after he knows that the man is an apostate. And therefore the rabbis ask, why or how is it that Rabbi Meir learned Torah at the mouth of this man? Even if he was his teacher, he was an apostate. Behold, and then the rabbi said, for the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek law at his mouth, for he is a messenger of the Lord of hosts. This means that if the teacher is like an angel, a malach of the Lord of hosts, they should seek the law at his mouth. But if not, they shouldn't seek law at his mouth. His colleagues are saying to him, you can't learn Torah from Acher, from Elisha ben Abuya. He is not a malach Adonai Tzevaot. He is not a messenger of the God of hosts. He is the worst heretic we have in the entire tradition. When Rabbi Dimi came to Babylonia, he said, in Israel they say the following. Remember, the rabbis are in Babylon and in Israel. Rabbi Meir ate the date and threw the kernel away. Rabbah said, what does that mean? And then there's a verse, I went down to the garden of nuts to look at the green plants of the valley. Why are scholars likened to the nut? To tell you that just as in the case of the nut, though it be soiled with mud and filth because of their actions, just like the nut, yet its contents are not condemned, because the goodness, the essence of their teaching, is encased, as it were, in the shell. So a scholar, though he may have sinned, yet is his Torah not condemned. This is an example of where the Talmud makes a statement exactly against the statement in Moed Katan about the rabbi having to be like a messenger of God. In other words, both of these statements are there. And therefore, Rabbi Meir found a pomegranate, he ate the fruit within it, and the peel he threw away. The famous line is, Haklipot zarakti, umashe betocho achalti. The kernels I threw away, but the substance of what he taught that was good, I devoured. I think, Jeff, your point is well taken. Depending on how you look at it, it's probably almost impossible not to justify almost anyone you would learn with, but simultaneously, the tradition is not completely content with that reality. And in the end, to paraphrase Sartre, Sartre in his play, No Exit, made the point that people are condemned to be free, which for Sartre meant you have to make decisions. And I would just paraphrase it by, and it's Ki Tisan, we're talking about freedom this week, and Beli Charut, Ein Cherut, I could go on. Without that which is inscribed, there is no freedom, namely the teaching of the law. The reality is that you're condemned to make decisions. And the fact is, decisions in the world we live in are messy, they're not always clean, and depending on your personality, you can obsess about them 4 years after you've made them as to whether you were right and wrong. With all of that, I thank you for your patience, your participation, and I hope you've enjoyed learning these texts. So Shabbat Shalom.
Before you take that off, if you could, how do you balance the tension between accountability in an age of cancel culture, accountability, and charges of wokeism?
So, one of the problems do I have it right?
Yeah, now you got it just right.
Is it okay now? Part of the problem is you're talking to a 75-year-old cisgender heterosexual white male. I mean, I live in an age when I read that Thomas Jefferson can't be read, I don't even know how to respond to that. Or Isaac Mayer Wise. He favored slavery. That is completely true. How could you honor him? And there has to be mention made of that. In other words, I need my student to help me.
So do I.
Okay, great. I think when the college tells the history of Isaac Mayer Wise, there needs to be in the story about him, this man did a lot of good things. He favored slavery, and that needs to be known. The problem, and now I speak not just as a rabbi, but also as an historian, how do you decontextualize everybody? The fact is, people in the world believed that slavery was legitimate during the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. That doesn't... And the problem I have with elements of woke culture is that they completely decontextualize everything. In other words, there's a standard in 2022, 2023 that we all live with, things that would be completely unacceptable. And yet, this was the nature of the world we lived with. I mean, the other point I'd make is, look, I grew up in a place like Virginia in the 1950s and 60s. It was a segregated society. I mean, I remember there were separate water fountains for African Americans and for white people. I remember once, I don't know why, in Newport News, in the public library, whites and blacks were both allowed to go. But in the rooms, they'd have separate water fountains for colored and white people. And once, an older cousin of mine, Myra, took a friend of mine, David Rosenwasser, and I to the library. We were about 6 years old. And we walked over to where it said, the water fountain that said colored. So we turned it on and we started to drink the water. And then we asked our cousin Myra, who was 6 or 7 years older than us, like, I don't know, the water doesn't look colored to us. It just looks, just looks clear. What? So, oh, okay. Right.
She had girlfriends that were non-Jewish. She asked them what they thought and who taught them about Christ.
Right.
They all said Jews taught Christ.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? And going forward, how will that translate into anti-Semitism?
Okay.
It's given by somebody holy.
Yeah. I understand. Look, is there Christian anti-Judaism? The answer is yes. But both examples are in effect the same. I grew up in a place where, because I was Jewish, I wasn't allowed into certain swimming pools. There were clubs, there were neighborhoods, all of which were forbidden. When my father graduated college from William and Mary in 1942, he wanted to do a PhD in British history. He was told by his advisor at William and Mary, you can't get a job, which was true in those days because your roots in Anglo-Saxon culture are so shallow, no Jew could be hired to teach English literature or fields like American or British history. My father ended up going to Harvard Law School. He was disappointed in that his entire life because he never wanted to be an attorney. Harvard Law was his consolation prize for not being able to earn a PhD. What is it one is supposed to do? That was 1942 when he graduated college, 58 and 22, so it's 80 years ago. It's too bad that that happened to my father. I mean, it wasn't fair. But what is it you're supposed to do with all kinds of things in relationship to history? For me, the issue in large measure is, what else is the person known for? Is the only, in other words, a man like Jefferson, if I go back to him, is guilty, in quotes, of all the sins with which people charge him. But that's not the totality of who Thomas Jefferson was. There are other elements for which he could be honored. I know that at Princeton they removed the name of Woodrow Wilson, I think, from their School of Foreign Service. Wilson was a notorious racist. I mean, it's hard to exaggerate how racist he was. He grew up in Stanton, Virginia, and he had the attitudes of Virginians in those years towards race. I mean, there's no question about it. Simultaneously, he was president of the United States. He appointed Brandeis. He attempted to start the League of Nations for whatever reason. His motivation had to do with wanting to create a world of peace. I just fear in all of this that you can get to a point where who could teach or preach anything? What if you're judged on the worst of who you are and not the best of who you are? And what I fear about the world, this is just my opinion, that it isn't a question of forgiving people, but I kind of like the line, Haklipot zarakti umasha b'tocho achalti. I throw away the husks, and I try to consume that which is good so that you don't excuse someone coming next door to you, as happened to me often in my Virginia. Yes. Well, he did a lot more. He used a lot more than just that doctrine to kill 6 million Jews. I'm not attempting, I hope no one here will think that the charge the Jews are deicides is something that I'm trying to favor. But I recognize that it was an element of Western culture which needs to be transformed in all sorts of ways. It isn't only your lovely wife who was told these things. I suspect other people in this room were told these things on different occasions. But What I fear, and I'm trying to answer your question, is that if a completely absolutist standard is established where a person has to be a malach Adonai Tzvaot every second, I don't think you're going to have many people left to teach you anything. And that does disturb me. And in the end, I go back to what I said before. You have to make some kind of judgments about these things. And I mean, this is where I leave it tonight. I don't think there's clarity in relation to this. I don't know how to resolve for you the fact that you have a beloved teacher who is guilty of sexual transgressions. I just don't know how to resolve that. Both things are true, and the reality is you might not want to learn from him again, and simultaneously, yeah, and so you may not have the, but let's say you did. You might not want to learn from him again, but simultaneously, does the person have room to make tshuva? In the end, I'm going to leave it at this, because I think this could go on, as it were, all night. And I can tell from the questions that have been asked and the way in which you respond that at least my aim in this shiur, in this lesson, has been accomplished. And I hope you leave tonight feeling bewildered by all of this. And I thank you very much.
And bewildered is often how I felt in class. It's actually a great reminder. Somehow over the last 29 years, I got the notion that I was supposed to ask every question clearly. And I forgot actually that really, in true deep thinking, there has to be about many, many things a lack of clarity. And there are few simple answers because life is complex, and the deeper the thought, the more complex it is. And thank you for really responsibly and morally reminding us of that. So before we move on, I want to correct myself and to truly apologize. I misspoke and spoke of Rabbi Maury Hirschman as being of blessed memory. We speak properly of Jerry Hirschman as being of blessed memory, and Maury, thank God, is alive and well, and Mark will be seeing him tomorrow, and I'm so very sorry, truly, truly, especially to all of us who know and really cherish Rabbi Hirschman, how horribly jarring that must have sounded, so I apologize and ask for your forgiveness, truly. Thank you. So with that, we turn to really another complex prayer with a lack of clarity, and that's the universalism versus the particularism of the Aleinu prayer. And the deeper we dive into that prayer, the more we see how truly there are aspects of Judaism that are beautiful and universal, and we should speak of them. And there are parts of our faith that are particularistic. And I'll share with you something that I shared at an anti-hate event, Burlingame-wide, in early February, which is that I think it's the responsibility of all of us who are religious leaders to point out the parts of our own faiths that may not speak to us today as the eternal teaching of God. And that we all have to own up to the fact that there are aspects of all of our faiths, of every faith, that contribute to hatred and an imbalance of power in this world. And if we really want to be good to the other peoples of the world, we will make sure we are teaching the students of our own faith that which we don't think in our sacred texts are the eternal teachings of God, to make sure that no one acts on them in a way that contributes to hatred and division in the world. So with that, the Aleinu is on page 282. It continues on page 287. If you're able, please rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהל, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
Friends, we can all be seated. We come now to the mourner's Kaddish, and it's our tradition at Peninsula Temple Sholom to give those who are saying Kaddish the opportunity to say the name of their loved one and just one or two sentences about that person so that we might get a glimpse into the specialness of that person and the role they had in your life. We'll start with Yash.
Just the other day, my daughter reminded me that this is the 50th yahrzeit of her grandfather, my father-in-law, Isaac Barron. I couldn't believe it was that long, and she wanted me to be sure to send her love. I probably, like all fathers, figured that I wasn't good enough for his daughter, but he welcomed me into the family, and he was always there when Barbara and I needed him. And one last thing, just coincidence, I don't know, but in the last line of our sheet here was the word pomegranate. And nobody loved pomegranates more than I did.
That was really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still saying Kaddish for my friend Susan Duhan Felix, who you may have read about in the Jewish Bulletin. We're still in Shloshim. And she was an Eshet Hayil, a great Jewish artist, and an extraordinary woman. They even have Susan Felix Day in Berkeley. Really special. And my father's yahrzeit is this month, and I just wanted to say something briefly that just comes to mind. He was a leader in the Reform movement in the 60s, and he didn't think my confirmation speech was good enough, so he wrote it. And I want to say to you the line that he wrote. It has been said that Western civilization owes its greatest concept of the social and moral obligations of the individual human being to the prophets. Now, it's okay now when I look back that he wrote it, but my father was an extraordinary man. He founded Social Action at Sheriff Israel in 1962, and I miss him tremendously. He was a judge in San Francisco, and may his memory be a blessing. And I'm going to say Kaddish for him tonight.
Just feeling a sadness for a dear friend of mine who passed away this morning. Olivia Goldstone was a fellow Bruin, a dear friend, and even as a friend, a mentor to me, and she will be missed very much.
This isn't someone I know personally, but such a big legend in the Jewish community passed away this week, Chaim Topol. And because of Fiddler on the Roof, I got in touch with my Jewish roots, and I just think he's such a big icon for so many Jewish people. So he died 2 days ago, so I just think it would be nice.
Mom passed a year ago, and we are going to visit Dad tomorrow. Before coming here, we stopped by the house, which is 2 doors away, and it's empty right now, and I think it felt kind of appropriate because there's a certain emptiness in our family for the loss of Mom. She loved the family, and she loved Judaism, and we miss her dearly.
Listen, I am talking for my wife. She doesn't want me to mention her father, who passed away many years ago, and today is his anniversary. Anyways, his name was Harry Fanberg. Anyway, so I'm here to mention him because he was a hell of a guy, and every time he went to synagogue, he used to pray because he was a Cohen, and I can only see how he stretched out his hands and had the talis over his head and was on his knees and prayed for the Am Yisrael. So I'm here to remind everybody of his passing, and here's my wonderful wife that I bless and can't do without. Thank you.
I'm saying Kaddish for my mother, Sue Kushner, who died 9 years ago. She was a wonderful person, had a big heart, a quick mind, an amazing mother, a celebrated teacher, a passionate runner, and wise about so many things. She was very kind and generous to stranger and friend alike, and had a lot of patience, which she needed raising 4 boys. Had a fierce sense of justice and fairness about those around her, and that stuck with her entire life, and it was really ahead of her times. And a great sense of adventure, which I always admired and inspired me, and I miss her a lot.
I'm remembering my father, David Kelly, who died 6 years ago. Lovely, lovely man. Was my mom and my dad, because my mom died when I was coming of age, and my father took on both roles for 3 girls, and he did a pretty good job with us. So may his memory be a blessing.
I'd also like to say a few words about her dad. Quartermaster Corporal David Kelly, a proud veteran of the U.S. Army, who served, ironically, in a segregated army and came back to a segregated Jim Crow South and actually taught her, his daughter, and all the kids how not to hate back when she would ask a very poignant question of why do they hate us. Her dad would say, I don't know, but we don't hate back. And he was a bigger-than-life hero for a lot of us for that reason.
How beautiful.
So I'm saying Kaddish for my father, Irving, who is now 23 years that he's passed, and I miss him. And I miss his sense of humor. He was, without a doubt, the world's worst joke teller. Great until the punchline, and then he forgot the punchline every time.
Hi, I'm saying Kaddish for my father, who would have been 100 today, and passed away a number of years ago. His name was Meir Boyarsky, but he shortened it when he went to the Naval Academy, because back in the 40s, the early 40s, it was tough there. So he, shortened the Boyarsky to Boyer. And anyway, he instilled in me a lot of, I'm going to say, the ideal of social justice, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
When we speak of what it means for our loved ones who have died their memories to be a blessing, I think we heard a dozen different ways that can be so. That their examples and their models and their words shine a path for us. And when we say Kaddish, we're allowing their examples and their words to suffuse our spirits. And by sharing with each other, we're giving the opportunity to more people to honor those memories as well. So in addition to the names that you just heard, we're also in the midst of Shloshim for Keith Martin, Phyllis Carroll, and Suki Glassman. And as an entire community, we're remembering the yahrzeits of Isaac Barron, Fanny Batat, Peter Batat, George Bloom, Barbara Cohn, Jerome Cohn, Doris Engel, Harry Fanberg, Irving Feynman, Marlene Lee Fishstrom Seda, Aileen Fox, Albert Gerson, Ruth Zanden Gold, Jack Goldman, Stanley Grinstein, Jerry Hirschman, David Kelly, Sue Kushner, Jacob Lesoff, Ken Madfis, David Maya, Keith Martin, Eugene Monison, Ben Fillin, Cantor Israel Reich, Robert Rochelle, James Rosen, Abraham Morris Rosenthal, Robert Schnall, Annette Louise Schwartz, Robert Shaw, Robert C. Siegel, Leo Tarlin, Margot Wachtel, and Mildred Wiener. If there is a name that hasn't been said yet, I would like to give you all the opportunity to say that name. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the memory of the righteous be a loving blessing. The Mourner's Kaddish is on page 294. I'd like to invite the mourners to rise first so we might recognize you as mourners and share words of empathy with you later. And if you're able, in support of the mourners, let's rise together. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Ba'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mavarach la'alam v'lalmei almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemei d'kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran ba'alma, v'imru amen. Yehei shlam araba min shamaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the source of peace send peace to those who mourn and comfort to those who are bereaved. Amen.
Amen.
Our closing song is going to be Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu on page 353. Let's remain standing if we're able so we can sing with full spirit and ruach. Charles and Emily, take us there.
Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, 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 aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam.
Folks, a heartfelt thank you to Mariano Sanchez in the back, to Charles Calhoun, to Emily Jasinski, to our scholar in residence, Dr. David Ellenson, to our service leaders, Rabbi Lisa Delson, Rabbi Leora Alban, to all of us, thank you for coming and being together. The weekend with David Ellenson continues, and we have a beautiful Oneg Shabbat awaiting. But first, Hamotzi. Let's join together the blessing over the bread.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz v'te'avo.
Forgiveness to you. May we all be blessed with a Sabbath of peace and refreshment, of wellness, and most of all, of grace, compassion, and peace. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.